Okay, so there's 8 signs or symptoms of going into perimenopause that you absolutely need to know so that you're not left in the dark.
Introducing the Perimenopause podcast, a show dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of achieving optimal health naturally as you transition into perimenopause and menopause. Get ready to join your host, Dr. Seth Yates, an experienced naturopathic doctor, acupuncturist, and kinesiologist, as he shares his wealth of knowledge acquired from over 40,000 patient visits and 15 years in working with perimenopausal females. Welcome to the Perimenopause podcast.
Hey, I'm Doc Yates. This is the Perimenopause podcast, brought to you by perimenopause.com and ablehealth.us. And today I want to discuss what are these signs and symptoms that you can recognize on your own to get an idea whether you're actually going into perimenopause or not. Because if these changes are happening and you're actually making this shift at this time in your life, it's better to know, because then you can start doing things about it. There's a lot of symptoms that you may already have and ones that are coming down the pipe that you can address and correct early by knowing this. Because here's the thing, generally speaking, you go into your doctor, you're like, oh, I think I'm going to perimenopause. Like, well, we'll just check. And what they're actually end up checking is a blood test for FSH and LH. And it does nothing, it's not really definitely about perimenopause because of the way perimenopause works with the timeline. They're just checking to see if your ovaries have failed or not. And if they failed, then like, oh, well, actually, you're in menopause. We know that now. And at that point, but there could still be a 10-year period of perimenopause for some people that you have to deal with before you're even in menopause. So there's like a huge window of time where shifts are happening in your body that you can do something about if you can recognize it. So let's dive into them. Number 1. Now, keep in mind, before I dive in, you don't have to have all of these 8 signs and symptoms to be in perimenopause, but each one of these can be a sign that your body is making this shift. And if you really dive into it, a lot of these signs and symptoms are really, they're just a reflection of what's happening to the progesterone levels in your body. As your progesterone levels start to dive, which happens around age 30, by the time you get to your 40s, they usually dropped enough that you're starting to get these symptoms. So now, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so number 1, your cycle is getting shorter. So say you always had a 28-day cycle, a 30-day cycle, and now all of a sudden you're like, it's like 24 days, 23 days. When you start to consistently notice that it's shifting to be less than 25 days, that is a sign that your body is probably shifting into perimenopause. Number 2, a new symptom. Now, these are, like, again, if you've had this your whole life, this is not a sign that you're in perimenopause. If you've been dealing with this since you're a teenager, doesn't mean you're going to perimenopause then. We're talking about something new and shifting, typically starting around age 40. New, sore, swollen, or lumpy breasts. This is another sign of progesterone dropping. And now we've talked about this in previous podcasts, and it's not just about progesterone. There's a lot you can do for breast health, but this is a sign that you need to start putting a little more focus on that. So get the progesterone balance, make sure you have the iodine that you need, do work in terms of lymphatic drainage for breast health. All of these things can help improve this. Number 3, the third sign of perimenopause, a new cramps or a significant increase in menstrual cramps. So if you're like, no, I've always had like easy periods my whole life, and now all of a sudden you're like, no, they're really painful and they never used to be, this is another classic sign you're probably going to perimenopause. Number 4, this is a big one. This is, for me, like one of the most classic symptoms of all, is that a change in your sleep cycle. So maybe you've had sleep issues before, problems falling asleep, or maybe you've had problems where you're waking up before your alarm around 4 or 5 a.m. But now we're talking about like waking in the middle of the night, so between 1 to 3 a.m. This you never dealt with before. Sometimes it just starts happening all the time. Sometimes people start noticing this happens about a week before their period, and then eventually becomes more and more frequent. This is a very, very classic sign of perimenopause, and if you see this, get your hormones checked, because not only is it a sign that you can balance your hormones, balancing your progesterone levels can make sure that you get good sleep, and good sleep is key to good health. Number 5, night sweats around your period or PMS. This is another classic symptom. I don't see this as often as I see the sleep disturbances. And keep in mind, there's other things that can cause night sweats. So sometimes the drop in progesterone will cause that, and sometimes a relative drop in progesterone. For instance, when you're pregnant, your progesterones go up like many times, and when then they drop back down to normal, that drop from a higher level to a lower level, you'll see people who get hot flashes or night sweats just after delivery, even though they're not in perimenopause. Number 6, new or increased migraines. Especially if you're starting to get migraines before your cycle and you never used to get that before, that is a pretty classic sign that you need to get addressed. Because you might end up just being prescribed painkillers when the actual problem, the root of the problem, is your hormones. Number 7, let's go on. New or increased PMS or mood swings. This is a really, really common one. A lot of females come in to the office and they're like, I am so much more short fused, and like I feel bad because like I'm like snapping on my kids or my husband, and at work they're just holding in all this irritability that they never used to have to deal with before. Classic sign of perimenopause. Balancing progesterone makes a big difference, and I've discussed this in previous podcasts, but there's an herbal formulas and acupuncture that you can do along with that makes a huge difference to speed that up. So don't hesitate to reach out and start using those types of programs. And number 8, this is the one that actually brings people into the office. The biggest thing that my clients notice for perimenopause is weight gain. Even though they haven't changed their exercise, they haven't changed their food intake, they're gaining more weight, and they're gaining it in spots that they've never gained it before. So around their abdomen, basically like midsection weight gain. So not in their hips, not in their chest, in their stomach. And it drives people crazy. And if you're struggling with this, then you need to get it addressed, because it's one of those things where you literally would feel like you're just spinning your wheels, getting no benefit. You're like, well, I'm just going to exercise more, I'm just going to eat even better, and you're still not getting any changes until we get these hormones corrected. So if that is a factor for you, if you're dealing with any of these 8 symptoms, get your hormones checked, get your hormones balanced, and you'll be working to kind of continuously ebb and flow. As your hormone levels continue to drop, you gradually increase the hormones that you need to take, and you'll find that you're going through perimenopause with bliss. So this is Doc Yates. I hope this was helpful, and I'm signing off.
Thank you for tuning in to the Perimenopause podcast. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and visit perimenopause.com for more valuable information on how you can thrive during your transition through perimenopause. Join our community of like-minded women who are dedicated to achieving optimal health naturally, and stay up to date with the latest tips, tricks, and advice from Dr. Seth Yates. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Perimenopause podcast.